Welcome back with my next installment of the top 100 or my favorite top 100 best albums of all time series on YouTube. So now we're in the top 40. Top 40, number 40 is the very newest addition to this top 100. So I had to build a bit around, had to artificially create another tie for a later episode where compress two albums into a tie so that I can shoehorn this album in, because that was a very recent development to put this album in the top 100, but I was aware of that album through downloads and or streams for many years now, but now for the first time I obtained it as a physical vinyl copy, and as it often is with such things, an album that you used to like this album, suddenly when you really listen to it in a very good record listening setting, you all of a sudden have an epiphany, like wow, this is even much better than I thought of, and I have to re-evaluate it. So it shot up into my top 40 of my favorite albums of all time. Number 40, Beastie Boys' Hello Nasty. I was always aware that this is a very important and influential album. First of all, for the Beastie Boys, they recreated their sound with this album. They became more, not really serious. This is the definition of a fun album, but a bit more mature than the first album. The first album was really like those adolescent kind of Brooklyn sense of humor, and yeah, not very grown-up album, let's put it that way. This is also a very fun album, but in a more grown-up sense, and it's much more artsy, but without being pretentious, not pretentious at all, post-boutique, and probably my new favorite, all-time favorite hip-hop album of all time. Another honorable mention would be another album by the Beastie Boys. The albums they did after that in the early 90s, they did Check Your Head, which is also fantastic. But I already had Hello Nasty somewhere between number 90 and 100, the 1998 album. So I don't want too many Beastie Boys albums. It would seem like they are the only hip hop band that I know of if I put in 3 albums. But Check Your Head is a very good progression from this album. If you like this album, you also will check your head. But this is the first time they and the producers, the Dust Brothers, really created that magic sound that would become synonymous with how we think about the Beastie Boys, and it's one of the most fun romps of an album. The next one is I don't know if this is a fun album. It's a kind of a fun album. It's the only studio double album by one of the most iconic bands of all time. And it's the only time in this top 100 ranking I will show you an album by this band. Therefore, it's my favorite album by Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti. One of the best double albums of all time, and one of the best rock albums, really pure rock albums, where it's about loud guitars and sex gods, iconic singer and wild drumming and so on. This is really a testosterone rock record, but also with some subtleties and nuances. Also, there's ballads, there's all kinds of variation of stylistic variation. That's how you do a double album. You really mix up things, but at its core, this is a rock album and a phenomenal, very monolithic sounding rock album. But like I said, which mixes up things with some variation and all kinds of styles, even Indian influenced zither kind of droney music like Into the Light, a funk, Led Zeppelin kind of funk song, and all kinds of, and also epic rock songs like Kashmir and 10 Years Gone. So it's really, it's really a milestone of a mid-70s classic rock album. The next one is like the opposite of that. That's a tie. I think that's probably, I made this tie so that I could shoehorn in the Beastie Boys album. But I think it's it's okay to have it as a tie, because I think I like both albums about the same and they're by the same artist. So if this wouldn't have been a tie, you know, I can tell you how it would have been before the Beastie Boys came in. This is very, very fitting to my t-shirt, to my James t-shirt. This is a James t-shirt, but you know, the color scheme. This is Very by Pet Shop Boys. If this wouldn't be in a tie, I would say I like Bilingual slightly more than Very, but I think I like them both about the same. In my mind, they are like almost like companion pieces. This is like the mid-90s Pet Shop Boys, when they were really at their most pop and shameless pop sounding. This is maybe a bit more artsy in the sense that it's almost a concept album about summer and vacation in summer, which sounds very shallow when you say it like that, but it's really a very cool album. And this is of course packed with pop classics from the 90s, you know, Go West, Can You Forgive Her, but also great album tracks. This is really Pet Shop Boys at their best with those two albums. And you know, who would have thought that in the like 1993 or 1992, before these came out, after the Imperial phase in the 80s, you know, from Please to Behavior, that they would even been able to kind of top that, you know, those first 6 albums, or 4 albums, the first 4 albums are almost flawless masterpieces. You know, they all the first 6 Pet Shop Boys are all in my top 100. Some we already had, one will still be coming. So I think the first 6 albums are all top 100 of all time masterpiece albums. And who would have thought after the first 4 that they, you know, could prolong that series of flawless albums. It's really impressive. Next one is of course also impressive, and you know, people who know me know I'm one of the biggest Beatle fans in the world probably, and some would expect me to have this even higher. This is the first Beatle album in the top 100. We had 2 or 3 solo albums by John Lennon and Paul McCartney already, but we haven't had a proper Beatle album yet. So some will be surprised that this is only my number 37, but 37 means I really love this album, and you know, it's my 37th favorite album of all time, so this is a huge album for me. But in terms of Beatles albums, it was never one of my ultimate favorites. Abbey Road, I think this is because this is the album where they start to not sound anymore like the Beatles. You know, this is the last album they recorded. You know, there have been a couple of overdub sessions for Let It Be in early 1970, but this is really the last proper album they recorded. And I always say I'm kind of glad they split up in 1970, because this already hints in a new sound direction for the Beatles that I probably wouldn't have been the biggest fan of. You know, it's a very polished album. It's not as eccentric. I mean, there's Mr. Mustard and Polyphene Pam and stuff like that, or Maxwell Silverhammer, one could say, is also eccentric, but this is one of the least eccentric, whimsical Beatle albums in my opinion. This is a very professional sounding album. You know, that was also the goal that they had in mind when they started recording this. Let's make one proper professional sounding album, one more of those, and then we can split up. And they succeeded. This is brilliant, obviously, a masterpiece, but not an ultra favorite of mine personally. But I can see its brilliance, and that's why it's number 37. 36, one of my favorite Kate Bush albums, The Dreaming, which is an album that I wouldn't say flopped, but wasn't as successful as some people hoped it would be in the early 80s when this came out. Maybe it wasn't initially as successful as the 3 albums before, but you know, this album, a bit like Ram by Paul McCartney, is an album that has redeemed itself and is now seen by critics, often seen as her very best album by critics and hardcore fans. This is where she finally really got weird. You know, when her first album came out, people back then even thought this is kind of weird and out there sounding, and second and third album also. But this is when she really took over and became 100% in charge. She was always kind of in charge, but this is also, you know, self-produced and very innovative strange ideas how to produce, and the way she produced this album, and then the synths, and then how she composed. She programmed the drum computer and then she composed the melodies on top of that. That would become very typical for 80s production, but she was kind of the first who did that typical 80s sound. And one could say that that typical 80s sound never really got better. They never really got improved after that by any of the other artists who kind of copied that approach. So this is a fantastic, brave, courageous album by one of the all-time greats, Kate Bush. Number 35. Maybe not the definition of a courageous album, but nonetheless one of my favorite albums of all time, and one of the most underrated albums of all time, in the sense that you won't find this in many other rankings of the 100 best albums of all time. But I really like disco music. Therefore, I'm also a Pet Shop Boys fan, because they're also influenced by disco, of course. But this is The Real Thing from the 70s. This is The Chic by Chic. Is it the second? I think it's the second album. And that was, the classic phase. The first 3 albums by Chic are really... That's when you think about Chic, you talk about the first 3 albums, although the others are also quite good. And this is the pinnacle of all their achievements, I would say. My all-time favorite Chic song is I Want Your Love, and the long version, which is the album version, of course. One of the best disco songs, but also one of the best pop songs of all time. A big hit, of course. Le Freak is also on there, but also the album tracks are fantastic. Some of the album tracks were Niall and Bernard are singing, and not the female singers, also great. It's really a fantastic disco album, and we've had it with Post Boutique when I talked about fun albums. If this would be a ranking of the most fun albums, the most positive, enjoyable albums to get you in a good mood, this would even be much higher. This would probably be in my top 10. This is really a fun album, a fine fun album. The next one with a different kettle of fish, number 34. Is it my number 1? I think it's my second favorite Neil Young album, but my favorite Neil Young and Crazy Horse album, Rust Never Sleeps. This is only about studio albums, this ranking, but this is, is it a studio album, is it a live album? It was recorded live, but it's just new material, and the audience was, put in the background, in the mixing process, put in the background, so that you don't really feel like it's a live album. Here and there you can hear a clap or a cheer or something, but mostly this is almost like this is a new album with new material. And what kind of material? It's fantastic. The first side, the acoustic side; the second side, the wild Godfather of grunge side. So this is one of the few Neil Young albums where you get both. The best of both worlds. He often has either an acoustic album and then he does an electric distorted album. This is one of the few cases where it's mixed, and where it's mixed really with a concept like the soft stuff, the AM radio stuff for the normies on side 1, and the weird wild stuff on side B. And it's some of his best acoustic music is on this album, and some of his best distorted electric music is on the album. The acoustic side, I don't want to pick favorites. I think I like all the songs on the acoustic side and the ones on the electric side. But if I had to pick a favorite, it would be Powderfinger, one of his all-time great songs. I would say very dramatic song and great solo. I know there are people who don't like, especially like some musician people who don't rate Neil Young as a lead guitarist, but I love his electric guitar playing on a track like Powderfinger especially. Maybe it's not technically that skilled, but it's the raw emotion of it, and the sound that it's really like it's a very dramatic sound. So really like that. The next one is one of the more controversial picks in the top 100, because except me, I don't know any Bruce Springsteen fan. I'm not really a Bruce Springsteen fan. I'm casual Bruce Springsteen listener, I would say, but I don't know anyone who listened to Bruce Springsteen albums who would pick this as his favorite album. It's often seen as an album where he still hasn't found his identity, but I like this. I like this more chaotic approach to it. I think the more Bruce Springsteen knows who he is, the more boring he gets to me, because then it gets more and more into this middle of the road dead rock thing the longer his career lasts. But this was really this is a kind of an anarchistic album, and I think that's something that's missing from some of his later work. His debut album, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey. Some of his best songwriting, especially lyrics, is on this album, and yeah, it often gets criticized like it's him showing off, with his lyrical prowess. But those are good lyrics. So I think he has every right to show off, to be show-offy on this album. And I think the E Street Band is also kind of on fire on this album. They really, although it's very early on in their career as a band, they're already, a fantastic unit as a band. Favorite tracks: Blinded by the Light, Growing Up. Also it speaks to the quality of this album that at least 2 of those songs have been covered by big artists, not too long after this was released. So It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City I think it was even a single by David Bowie. Very, David Bowie covering Bruce Springsteen. That's what I meant with this as being maybe one of his more artsy and chaotic albums. You can't imagine David Bowie covering a song from Tunnel of Love or even Born in the USA. But David Bowie covered It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City. And Blinded by the Light, of course, was a big hit for Manfred Mann. So great songwriting. Also David Bowie would agree with that. Number 32 is my favorite Tom Waits album, Closing Time. An honorable mention would be Swordfish Trombones, which is more experimental, weird, wild Tom Waits of the later years. This is his debut album, where he still tried to come across like a normal piano ballad guy. It's a bit more a more artsy version, a less pop version of Billy Joel almost. The first Billy Joel album and this album. But this is already darker and less pop, of course, than anything Billy Joel or Elton John would ever do. But it's compared with the other Tom Waits albums, it's so much more commercial sounding, and I really liked that sweet spot that songs like All 55, I think the Eagles had a big hit with that, and Martha is one of my favorites. Grapefruit Moon, it's really this crooner aesthetic, this like a movie like Casablanca. This sounds like the music to a movie like Casablanca, and I also kind of like the more weird albums, and Swordfish Trombone would be my pick for his best of this other phase in his career. But on an emotional level, this is my favorite. This is an album I kind of grew up with. My parents had it in their household. I think even this copy probably. And yeah, this is maybe Swordfish Trombone is the more bold and the more iconic album. But this is a case like Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, where ultra fans of the artist would say he hasn't yet found himself. But sometimes I really prefer the artists who are still looking for their identity. That sometimes creates something magical, in my opinion. And also magical is my number 31, and this is going to be the last Pet Shop Boys album. So we have all the first 6 Pet Shop Boys albums made it into the top 100. So they're really rivals with the Beatles in terms of who has most albums in the top 100. At the end of the list, I can have a look who has the most albums. But Pet Shop Boys definitely in the top 3, maybe top 2 acts with most albums in the top 100. Although, like I said before, one was a tie, Barry and Bilingual. But my all-time favorite Pet Shop Boys album is Introspective. If you want to find out more what I think about this album, I once ranked all the Pet Shop Boys albums, and logically this was my number 1 pick in this ranking video. So let's check out this video if you're interested about my thoughts on this album. But this is this is also There's only this album in the catalog that sounds like that. It's almost like a remix album. There's lots of Pet Shop Boys remix albums, and it's debatable, is this, of the official studio albums catalog, or is it a remix album? But the Pet Shop Boys themselves also have canonized this as a studio album, with the archive editions and so on. So I'm pretty confident that I can call this a studio album, and it's fantastic. Left to my own devices, I'm not scared. I want to talk. Always on my mind. Domino dancing is my favorite of the tracks of this album. It's just 6 tracks, and I think I told you now all the tracks. Maybe it's alright that I forgot, but all the 6 tracks basically. And that's the reason why it's my #1 album, because it has no filler. 6 tracks, and they're all fantastic. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.